Hey everyone, James Azar here with CyberHub Engage. Welcome to our virtual summit. I've got a very, very special session. For those who are listeners of the CyberHub Engage podcast, I've got a usual fun face that's always on the show with me, my good friend Mark Houpt. Mark is the CISO at DataBank. Mark, how's it going, buddy?
Hey James, it's going great. It's kind of strange seeing you and talking to you via video instead of face-to-face this time.
I know. Typically, we find a reason to fly somewhere to do these.
I know.
Not today, right? Not today. Not in the era of COVID-19. And
no way.
You know, for this session, I kind of wanted to pick your brain. It's really interesting. Literally 2 months ago this week, we did our roundtable in Dallas.
Right. We were in Dallas together.
And COVID was kind of starting to pick up, but it wasn't as serious. Like, we still had people in the room. We were still out in restaurants, eating barbecue, you name it. We were having a great time.
We were living our normal life at that point.
We were. Here we are 2 months later. We did our State of the Union address because it was the week of the State of the Union, if you remember.
That's right.
We did tear up our speeches after. For those who haven't seen that session, you guys can go back and watch it on our CyberHub Engage YouTube page and whatnot. It was an absolute joy of a podcast with our good friend Patrick Benoit from CBRE, a great State of the Union. And here we are 2 months later, and I think it's time for a new State of the Union. I mean,
it's completely changed. I mean, 2 months ago, we were living in a different world, in a whole different space, and we were all kind of looking over to China going, why can't you get your act together? And now we're having to look inward at about the same thing, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone that could have potentially prepared for a pandemic like this, unless you're a Hollywood producer with a script and you wrote this like 12 years ago on a shroom doozer. And,
right. You know, it's one of those things where you talk about, you know, some of this stuff's out of spy novels. If you look at it from the perspective that it could have been a bioweapon, or like you're saying, from a Hollywood producer perspective, if you're looking at it, you know, just from a general, you know, spreading across the world type of situation. But it is definitely a different world that we're living in today.
So here's the thing, though. This has really kind of, you know, we were in our 2020 State of the Union. One of the things we were talking about was the switch to cyber as a service, a lot of those different things. But now the cyber paradigm has completely shifted. Let's kind of talk a little bit about that. What are the biggest shifts in cyber because of this COVID-19 that are really going to carry us forward? It's going to essentially be the new economy.
Well, it's obviously rather early to say what they are. You know, I think definitely the work from home paradigm is going to be different. And as you and I kind of chatted earlier, you know, this whole work from home thing, I think we're going to see a lot of changes that are non-cyber that are going to roll over into cyber. For example, I think you're going to see some exodus from larger cities into more bedroom communities and rural suburban type of environments, people kind of going back home to reduce the risk on their families, especially young families. And that's going to result in more work from home opportunities, more work from home jobs. And that in turn is going to then put some more pressure on some of the internet capacity that's been so far focused on larger cities and larger area populations to now shifting to the smaller populations. I mean, if I were to turn the camera around and show you outside, I live in the middle of a cornfield, and the only internet service that I have available right now is a broadband wireless type of communication. I don't have the in-ground fiber and that kind of thing that's available to me. And yet I'm still able to do this type of podcast and still able to Zoom and things like that. So what we're gonna see is the effect on the infrastructure of cyber, which then of course has a play on, whether we allow BYOD for people that are working from home, and what that looks like from a cybersecurity perspective. How do I, as a CISO, enforce my security policies on somebody's bring your own device? How do I enforce them to use my antivirus, my malware? How do we enforce a strict tunneling VPN type of solution rather than a split tunneling type of solution on a firewall, which of course will, we could keep rolling this through, but if you don't allow for split tunneling on somebody's work from home solution, then you increase the bandwidth and the traffic that's going through your firewalls, and you probably have to have more than one VPN or multiple VPN concentrators for a corporation. All these things just kind of roll out. We can keep going down the list of what this means from a cyber perspective, but this whole work from home thing is going to be a big deal for us to have to work through here, both as an IT professional and also as a security professional here in the coming weeks, coming months, even longer.
You bring up a great point, which is the BYOD policy. I think a lot of people were caught off guard. And like we said, 60 days ago, you and I were in Dallas.
Right.
Hanging out, doing our State of the Union, did our CISO roundtable. We were just having a great time. We did a live podcast where we were sitting right next to each other, Mark. Right next to each other. And here we are 60 days later. We're 60 days. We're not talking 3 months, 6 months. No. Folks, we were together 2 months ago. I think it's setting in for me right now that 2 months ago, I was traveling and Micah had a mask on his face, and I wouldn't wear mine.
And we laughed at him.
We did laugh at him.
No offense to Micah, but we laughed at him.
We did.
And it was kind of fun. But now we aren't, right?
Yeah, now we're like, oh, good for him. Good for him for actually being responsible and wearing a mask. And I've traveled 3 times since. I went to RSA, I was in Israel, and I came back. And so it's quite unfathomable to see how everything's kind of stopped, and no one prepared for this. And so a lot of companies had a BYOD policy, but it had to do more with your BYOD on the corporate network. Right. Now that your BYOD is at home, in your private home, on your private home network, doing business stuff, how does that change your BYOD policy?
Well, that's a really good question. I think from my perspective as a CISO, it's going to change the policy of having to reach my security into a person's home, which is always challenging to enforce, and it's challenging to verify. We've talked about in our other podcasts about trust but verify rather than zero trust, and my whole negative connotation and thought process with zero trust. And for those of you that want to hear, go back to the State of the Union. I went on a tangent with it and resulted in some fun conversation. But we're going to have a new trust but verify thought process here. We're going to have to be able to reach into via remote desktop or some other function into people's computers to verify that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, that there's firewalls in place, there's security tools. I think there's going to be some enhanced security tools. I don't know if there's going to be some new security tools, but I think there's going to be some enhanced security tools over the next couple of years, where things that we normally would put on a server, we may start putting on workstations. For example, there's a number of products out there, like, for example, we usually don't put integrity monitoring tools, or even I may demand that those things are placed onto a personal computer, so that if I need to do a forensics investigation, or even if I need to do an HR investigation to find out if the person is wasting their time and not being productive and efficient working from home, I can do that without necessarily getting on that computer, because the logs would be offloaded to one of my servers. Then with that, again, this whole thing's a rolling thing, but you get into the privacy aspect. If it's a personal device and I have all of their logs, how do I know which parts were done on the personal time versus parts that were done on the work time? How do I define what was done at lunch versus what was done at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon when they should be working? What is their lunch period, for that matter, whenever I do my forensics? It just opens up a whole new can of worms for what would our BYOD policies look like. In the past, it's been, hey, you bring your own device. You can only attach to certain cloud products. You can't get on the VPN, or if you get on the VPN, you have to use a VDI solution. And that may be more stringent in the future. But there's a lot of things that we have to deal with coming in the next few months if this sticks around, which I believe it will.
Yeah, I think we're for those who've attended some of our other virtual summit and have heard me speak about this, I don't think this is going away anytime soon. I think social distancing is going to be the norm for the next 12 to 18 months.
Right.
Your contingency plans change. Your business continuity plans are changing. Your incident response plans are changing. Everything is kind of updating to deal with this new situation that we live in. But how do you feel like this situation really impacts cybersecurity as a whole from a CISO perspective? How has that changed your modus operandi now as a CISO as compared to maybe before?
Well, to be determined. I think it puts more focus on continuity of operations planning, business continuity planning. We're getting a lot more questions from our customers. So, you well know that DataBank is a service provider. So we're getting a lot more questions from our customers about how we're operating that space. There's a lot more, because I am kind of coordinating our continuity of operations. There's a lot of collaboration between other departments within the organization. For example, I have a very close relationship with our data center operations team because they're the ones that are implementing some of the recommendations and the procedures that I have in place, such as wiping down the biometric readers and and the doors and doing health checks and the types of questions that are asked of health checks to potentially stay away from HIPAA violations, where we're not necessarily recording their answers. So there's a lot of there's a lot of factors from a security perspective that are yet to be determined. One of the things that I just mentioned was biometric readers. I'm just wondering if all of a sudden biometrics is really going to shift to a no-touch biometric type solution. A lot of our biometric readers now are fingerprint related, and everybody touching that thing and in a lot of cases actually pressing down on that, leaving their mark behind is going to be a change. So I know even before this occurred, I was aware of a lot of biometrics or two-factor type of authentication that can come into play with your cell phone, your smartphone. So I think that I think biometrics is going to either fall into a no touch or out of popularity piece as a change that's going to occur. There's just how many things that we're still evaluating and things that are going to happen that down the road. What I fear, though, the most is that as we're focused on BCP continuity of operations and maintaining the business in this new environment of work from home and so on and so forth, that we're going to lose focus on continuous monitoring. So we're going to lose focus on the traditional security side of things. And as a result, the hackers and the people that are nefarious trying to take advantage of that are going to do so and be successful in that. Some companies are already talking about, well, hey, I don't want to patch right now because if I patch and a server goes down, who's there to go and reboot that server for me, or who's there to go and power clear that server? Well, that's an advantage of a data center in that we have remote hands functions that can do that, but in an enterprise type of environment or in a smaller SMB type of environment where they're doing all their work from remote, those are challenging situations. So we can't lose focus on continuous monitoring and good security hygiene, because that is what keeps us from being attacked. But yet the focus of what we do in security for right now, for this time, is shifting to that of operations. Long term, I think the BCP continuity of operations testing is going to be less of a checkbox and more of a not even a table talk, but an actual, hey, everybody's working from home today, and we're going to test the strength of our VPN and stress test that, and we're going to close our doors for 2 days and see, from an outsider's perspective, we're still going to operate, but we're going to see how what it feels like to not be in the office and not operate on a in the office type function. I think you're going to see that kind of thing happening on an annual basis, if not more frequently. So again, to be determined, but there's a lot of things that are going through my mind as to what we need to do, what we need to be careful of, and what's going to happen going forward.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a really interesting point, which I feel has a lot to do with how CISOs are going to be operating going forward, which is, don't forget your basic blocking and tackling, because you still have a network, you still have a corporate network, you still have data. Your endpoints have changed. That is very true. Mm-hmm. And you need to address that. But when you start to kind of look at this over the global scale of just the sheer, not just the financial and economic impact of COVID-19, but how it's really affecting cyber in almost every single country in the world.
Yep.
And how do you start preparing, and how do you really address that in your business continuity plan, which is how do you start kind of rounding out the different threats, and how do you evaluate threats differently now?
Well, I think first of all, you have to really look at the process that we've done of looking at globalization. An obvious target, if you will, to look at from a security perspective is the acquisitions and supply chain function, and how that impacts what we do. We used to look at it as CISOs from the perspective of what happens if a foreign state would be able to place a chip or code onto an existing chip that would compromise our environment. But now we need to take that a step further and say, are we even able to get those pieces of equipment? Now, typically that would be more of an IT side of things, but what I'm concerned about from a CISO perspective is I'm concerned that the IT folks will just run, because supply chain is so low right now, and could be continuing for the next year, that they're just going to run and get the material from wherever they can. They're going to get inferior material that can't be patched, that cannot be updated, that is difficult to deal with, that then rolls down into my team, my security team, saying, how are we going to patch this if the vendor is not putting out patches because they're not a quality vendor? So we're going to have to look at all aspects of that. We're definitely going to have to look at the how these kinds of pandemic viruses that start out regionally, how we convince our leadership that without crying wolf too many times, that this could be another situation that takes us down, and that we need to prepare for it. We need to have a continuity plan in place. So I'm giving you some vague answers there, because I think that there's a lot still to be determined. There are some aspects there of how does this change us from a security perspective that won't change. And we in security have been dealing with global actors for from the dawn of time, if you will, when it comes to security related things. So we're still going to see the ransomware type of attacks coming in from outside of the U.S. We're still going to see, attackers, DDoS attacks, and things like that occurring. What will be interesting, I don't see this happening in the United States where we put up a like China, a great firewall type thing, but it will be interesting to see what other countries do. And whether they even see a focus on cybersecurity anymore, if the threat has shifted, and then now all of a sudden that we as CISOs have to fight for once again fight very strongly for our right to be seen and heard in a non-co-op BCP type of situation, and the threat of true cyber attacks still looms out there in front of us. So it's going to be a challenge. We're going to have to see how it works out over the next couple of months, and where things go.
I have said this is prime time for CISOs. I think when this is all over, the board meetings that are going to be coming in June, July, August, September are going to be critical for CISOs, because that's where you're able to really talk about the stuff that's been done, the stuff that still needs to get done, and how you prepare for the second wave of this thing, because the second wave's coming in October, November, folks, and it's going to stick around until March, April of next year. And so we're nowhere near done with this. This is wave one in the trench, in the fight, and we hope to have by next fall's flu season to have a vaccine in place. And there's a lot of different information out there, but the timeline is fairly identical in the fact that it takes about 12 to 15 months to get the FDA to approve a vaccine from the moment it's established, and so they don't have a vaccine yet.
So we're looking at vaccine for the fall of 21, not fall of 20. So that means we're going to have to deal with this for the next year and a half before we have something that we can protect ourselves with. You're right.
Yeah, one thing that I did notice, that a lot of the smaller countries, people use a lot of different countries as an example, and to go, well, look at Iceland, or look at Sweden, or look at Norway, or look at all these guys. And I'm like, they're 8, 9, 10 million people. They're not 320 million people. They don't live in densely populated places like New York. New York is the hardest hit area because it's densely populated. Other areas that aren't densely populated, that have just as many people as New York, weren't as critically hit as New York, folks. New York is an exception, not the rule.
No, I would agree. But, one of the things that I also believe that, as much as I hate to say it, some of the stay-at-home orders I think you're seeing some effect on it. New York is the hardest hit area. It's the most dense population. But in Dallas, in Minneapolis, in Chicago, places like that, they have dense populations as well, and you're not seeing them hit as hard yet. And that may be, time will tell, but it may be because we're asking people to stay at home. We'll have to see. One of the things I've found interesting with this whole thing, to go off on a little bit of a tangent, is how listening to governors and medical professionals use words that we as CISOs have used for so long. It's just, things like, well, we're asking you to stay at home, and if nothing happens, then we've been successful. CISO's been saying that for years. If you're not being attacked, if there's not been a successful attack, then the tools and such that we put in place, the things that we spent the money on, are being successful. And you had mentioned that first, the board that we're going to have to deal with here in May and June, those conversations, the CISOs are going to have to explain, how they've taken their companies through this process. Everything from the things we've already talked about, the work from home pieces, to enacting the continuity of operations plans. How early did they start warning their leadership, and what actions did they take? And if you're a CISO and you haven't already figured out what you're going to say to the board, or at least to your leadership that's going to convey to the board, I would start talking about that in your head right now with yourself, and deciding what your slide deck's going to look like, how successful your functions in this COVID thing are. How many times did you enact things in your corporation that prevented people from getting sick, that prevented bad things from happening in your organization? Inside DataBank, we enacted very early. You're talking about 2 months ago. We were in Dallas. We had a COVID-19 plan there when you were in Dallas. We put ours together in January. We had a plan and we pulled it off the shelf and we used it beginning on March 5th of this year is when we threw the switch and activated it. And we immediately started, deciding that travel to different places was, off limits. We got the leadership team together, things like that. So when I go before the board and I talk to the board, or I send my slide deck up to the board, I'm going to tell my team, we've had a very, very low infection rate because we went to work from home quickly. We were capable of doing that, and everybody was doing it without any problems. And that, the people that we've had in infections are results of where they live. A couple people up in the New York, New Jersey area. And those folks that are work from home constantly, they've been impacted by it, but our data centers itself has not been impacted. And I can, as of right now, and I can walk in and say that confidently. So today, that may change a couple weeks from now, but right now, that's the message that I'd be sending to the board, is that we were prepared, we enacted the plan, and we worked the plan to completion.
You think there's a shift in leadership between the public-private partnership and cyber? You think because of the amount of corporation that's needed right now with government, with different aspects of government, do you feel like there's been a level of trust maybe established of people who are a bit, kind of looking at CISA with a raised eyebrow are now looking at CISA going, okay, they're a good resource. We can trust in them. We can maybe open a little bit more the door for more information sharing, more ways to work with them.
Yeah.
Are you seeing that?
Definitely have seen that. So I'll give you two examples. Number one is, so I never looked at CISA with a raised eyebrow. I've always looked at CISA as a great opportunity to have a friendship and an opportunity to get some information out of them and for me to share information in. But folks within, some of the folks within DataBank have always, said, hey, if we're sharing with people like DHS and CISA and whatnot, then we run the risk of them coming in and seeing or taking over things that we don't want them to see. And that's a myth that we've worked to deal with. But the information that has been coming out of CISA, and when they declared certain functions and published it very early, national critical functions, my leadership was very pleased with that and was able to see that partnership working effectively. And the fact that I've had conversations back and forth with CISA a number of times. I've been very pleased with their responsiveness. And here's the example I'll give with CISA. I will send an email message to CISA, my CISA contact, and I'll get a response within a couple of hours, day or night, couple of hours. Whereas I've sent messages into the SBA, Small Business Administration, to clarify, for example, whether or not a data center is considered to be a utility for some of our customers that are submitting SBA loan requests, and that's been days, and I still haven't gotten a response on that question. I've sent messages into other agencies that we have continual relationships with as a FedRAMP a provider, in particular the FedRAMP PMO, and it's taken a longer time than usual to get a response back. But CISA, man, they are right there within a couple of hours. I'm getting the data, and not only am I getting a pat answer back, but I'm getting an email that's this long that describes their position and what they're looking for from the representative, and then 2 or 3 attachments with that allow me to say, to my leadership, this isn't just somebody's opinion, but this is a document that's been provided. So CISA is really shining, in my opinion. DHS as a whole is really shining through this process, I believe.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times during these periods of times, people look at, I think, government with a raised eyebrow. I feel like in cyber, a lot of us, we had CISA at our Atlanta roundtable. We had a Clint Walker from CISA at our roundtable. I felt like he was able to really establish that level of trust and continuity with everyone in the room, and just letting him know they're a partner and not a regulator, not someone who's out to get you. They're not trying to find you. They're really just out to help you.
And, I think that's the value of creating CISA as a sub-agency of DHS, is because a lot of people looked at DHS as kind of a pseudo FBI CIA conglomeration that's after 9/11, that was out there to collect intelligence and go out and get the bad guys. And I think that's where part of some of the concerns within my organization is that what exactly are they after? What are they looking for? But whereas CISA, they've kind of taken that brand, and they've said, hey, we're here to help. They've even got liaisons out there. They followed an FAA structure where they've got people that do nothing but talk to businesses and talk to government, state, local government entities. Their whole job is basically to be a CISA sales engineer out there, finding out what organizations like mine need, going back to CISA, getting that information and formally publishing it and putting it out there for us. The FAA does that a lot with their general aviation crew. I've got a guy I know that does that for the FAA, and that model in CISA is working quite well as well.
Yeah, it seems like that's the model that's really going to be kind of going forward. I think if you're a CISO and you're watching or listening, I will say that if you haven't gotten a CISA contact, you can obviously reach out to us or myself or Mark. We can help you, or just reach out to to CISA yourself and introduce yourself and do that, and you'll be just quite okay.
And something else, if I can keep going on CISA, I know before COVID started, I know that CISA had only 40 or 50 liaisons throughout the entire country, and they got funding to add some 100, I think, liaisons or thereabouts. So they're taking the role seriously, and frankly, if you're looking for a job, they've got the postings out on usajobs.gov, I think is what it is right now, in various parts of the country. If you're looking for that liaison type of role as your next step in the career, they're looking for people to help out.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Mark, kind of as we wrap up our session here. Do you feel like there's going to be a new set of skills that are going to be required from cybersecurity professionals based on COVID-19, that some skills are going to have gone obsolete? Or if so, what new skill are you specifically looking for that maybe before you weren't really looking at, and now you're like, it matters?
Yeah, so it's funny you said that, because I'm putting together a presentation for another organization, training session, if you will, right now about cybersecurity career tracks. After 9/11, there was, in large enterprises, there was a reemphasis on business continuity planning and a person that was specifically responsible for that. I think after a few years that died away again. Through the 2008 economic crash, a lot of people realized that function was more of a what if something happens, and they're just waiting for something to happen. And so I think that's an art, if you will, that's going to come back. And it depends on the organization, but most CISOs should be looking to encourage that function to be within their purview, in my opinion. Now, some larger organizations may require a completely separate team for that. The multi-thousand people companies, but it really should fall under the CISO, because that CISO has a view, if you will, responsibility for all the different planning. And operations that may go on as a result of that. So I think that's an art that's going to be coming back. That's a skill set that I'm going to be looking for in my compliance and security engineering team going forward. On the compliance side, I'm looking for people that really understand and know and have been through a BCP type solution where they're not just writing a document that we don't think is ever going to get used and is just a checkbox. I'm looking for people that know how to write the documents, maintain the documents, and actually test and work the documents on the compliance side. And on the security engineering side, I'm looking for people who can lead an incident response team as an incident response commander within the business continuity side of things. And I specifically say that because a lot of it, security engineers and leads and architects are used to running incident response from a cyber perspective. Now they're going to have to add that skill set of dealing with so many extra departments in a business continuity situation. In an IR setting, they may be dealing with network and engineering and support and more IT people, whereas in a BCP type thing, you're going to deal with HR. You're going to deal with people that are being hurt, and you need to have empathy as well as sympathy for people that are going through challenging times, and sometimes engineers are not that type of person. So we're going to be looking for some different skill sets along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of, I want to say the silver lining of all of this is it's really bringing out new skills, new people to the front lines. I think cyber is one of those where if you're looking for a job now, there's no shortage. You can always reach out and kind of find people to help you through this tough time, even if it's something just to kind of get some direction specifically with that. Mark, thank you so much for joining me on today's session, man. I really do appreciate you taking time and coming on board, and I love the fact that I can just call you and just be like, "Hey, Mark, let's do something," and you're like, "Let's do it." And
let's go for a jam session, right?
Yeah, let's
no
do
instruments, just microphones.
Yeah, a jam session with our voices and our brains. And so for those kind of thank you to Mark Houpt. He's the CISO at DataBank. We have more sessions coming up for this virtual summit, so don't go anywhere. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back after this, folks.